Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Daniel thought he knew his wife. He truly believed it. 15 years of marriage had to count for something. It was supposed to build a foundation, a fortress of trust and intimacy, brick by painstaking brick. But on that damp October evening, as he watched Veronica place her champagne flute into the dishwasher with a mechanical, precise movement, he realized the fortress might have been made of glass all along, and he had been living inside, oblivious to the cracks spreading silently under his feet. The house, their house in the quiet suburbs of Portland, was filled with white lilies, her favorite. The scent of seared salmon, a recipe he'd spent hours perfecting, still lingered in the air. This was supposed to be a triumph, their triumph. Veronica, his brilliant, beautiful Veronica, 42 years old and at the absolute peak of her game, had finally secured the promotion, vice president of marketing. It was the crowning moment of a climb they had started together, or so he had believed. He'd spent the afternoon preparing the surprise. He sent his junior analyst home early from the small investment firm he ran, a business he kept deliberately modest, deliberately stable, so she would never have to worry. He'd stopped at the florist, the fish market, the specialty wine shop for the French champagne they saved for moments exactly like this. They'd met in college. He was a focused finance student. She was a whirlwind in the business school, already talking about corporate ladders and glass ceilings with a fire in her eyes that both intimidated and captivated him. He fell in love with that ambition, with her certainty. He loved the way she knew exactly where she was going. He just always assumed he was going there with her. They married 2 years later. A simple ceremony. Close friends. Family. Soon after, he opened his firm. Slow, steady growth. It was enough. It was always enough to give her the freedom she needed. When their daughter, Chloe, was born 12 years ago, it was Daniel who adjusted. He shifted his schedule. He handled the school runs, the parent-teacher conferences, the afternoons spent helping with homework while Veronica was in late-night strategy sessions or flying to conferences in New York or Chicago. Her career was a marvel, a dazzling ascent. Daniel had been her biggest supporter, her proudest advocate. When she mentioned going for the vice president position 2 years ago, a role that required immense political maneuvering within the company, he'd encouraged her without hesitation. He took on even more at home, insulating her from the daily grind so she could focus. He explained to Chloe that Mom was building something important. For all of them, Chloe, a sensitive and intelligent girl, seemed to understand. But Daniel saw the small flicker of disappointment in her eyes when Veronica missed her school play, or the regional volleyball finals, or just another Tuesday night dinner. The confirmation call had come on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Veronica's voice on the phone was taut with a controlled, victorious energy. He immediately set the plan for their celebration in motion. He even called Veronica's mother to ask if Chloe could stay the night, a suggestion Veronica herself had made earlier in the week, saying she wanted a quiet moment, just the two of them, to celebrate. She arrived home around 9 that night, later than planned, but wearing the radiant smile he hadn't seen in months. She was in the navy blue power suit he loved, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to contain the weight of all her ambitions. Dinner was perfect. They talked about the new role, the increased responsibilities, the celebratory gala the company would be holding. Daniel watched her face, animated by the candlelight, and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. "We did it." The shift happened in the kitchen. As they stood side by side at the sink, the warm glow of the dining room behind them, her tone changed. It shed its celebratory warmth and took on a cool, professional edge. The voice she used in boardroom. "Daniel," she began, her back still to him, "we need to talk." He turned, still smiling, a dish towel in his hand. "Of course. Should we finally book that trip to Italy? With your new bonus, we could." "No," she said. She turned to face him. Her expression was calm. Disturbingly calm. "It's about us. About our future." The words that followed were not a discussion. They were a verdict. Delivered without passion, without anger, without even a hint of sadness. She wanted a separation. It hit him not like a wave of emotion, but like a series of precise, calculated blows. His legs felt weak. He gripped the edge of the granite counter, the stone cold and unyielding beneath his fingers. He struggled to draw a breath, to make sense of the sounds forming words in the air between them. She kept talking. Her voice never wavered. She explained that she had thought it over for a long time, that they had grown in different directions, that she no longer felt the connection a marriage required. Then came the words that would sear themselves into his memory like a brand. "You're a good man, Daniel. You're an excellent father. But I've achieved my professional independence now. I need to move forward." He tried to speak, to form a question, but his throat was tight. It was as if she had anticipated everything. She had already consulted lawyers. She mentioned the division of assets, custody arrangements for Chloe. Every sentence was rehearsed, polished, a closing argument in a case that had already been decided. Finally, he managed to choke out the one question that mattered. Is there someone else? For the first time, she hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. A barely perceptible flicker in her calm facade. "It's not about another person," she said, her voice a little too firm. "It's about me, about what I need to feel fulfilled, though." He stood there, gripping the counter, the scent of lilies suddenly cloying, suffocating. The champagne he'd celebrated with now tasted like ash in his mouth. He was looking at his wife of 15 years, the mother of his child, and realizing with a terrifying, hollow clarity that he didn't know this woman at all. The next 3 days were a blur of muted color and muffled sound. Daniel moved through his life on autopilot. He drove to the office. He sat in meetings, staring at spreadsheets, the numbers and charts dissolving into meaningless patterns. He nodded and spoke, his voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. His body was present, but his mind was trapped, stuck permanently in that kitchen, replaying Veronica's words over and over, searching for a crack in their cold logic. When Chloe came home from her grandmother's, her face was a canvas of confusion and fear. That was the hardest part. Kneeling down to meet her gaze, his heart fracturing as he tried to explain the inexplicable. "Mom and we're going through a difficult time," he'd said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "We just need some space from each other for a little while." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "Is it my fault?" she whispered. He pulled her into a hug, his own throat thick with unshed tears. "No. Oh, sweetheart, no. Never. This is not your fault. Ever." He held her tight, assuring his daughter of a truth he himself was beginning to doubt. He didn't understand what had happened. He didn't understand the fault lines that had ruptured their lives. But as the initial shock began to recede, it was replaced by something else, a gnawing disquiet. It wasn't just what she said, but how she'd said it. The coldness, the unnerving level of preparation. It felt less like a heartbreaking decision and more like a corporate restructuring. His analyst's mind, the part of him that looked for patterns and discrepancies, began to stir. He started pulling at a loose thread of memory. And the more he pulled, the more the fabric of his 15-year marriage began to unravel. Small things, details he dismissed at the time, now resurfaced with a sinister glow. The trips, there had been so many in the last year, always framed as essential networking events, seminars, client meetings. He had never questioned them. Why would he? Then there were the gifts. A few months ago, a pair of expensive diamond earrings. A thank you from a major client, she'd said breezily. On the night of the celebration, she'd worn a delicate gold necklace, one he'd never seen before. It certainly hadn't come from him. And her phone. It had become an extension of her hand, always angled away from him, buzzing with late-night emails she claimed were from her team on the West Coast. The emotional distance had grown so gradually he'd barely noticed it, mistaking her preoccupation for professional focus. He had made excuses for her, for them. He had told himself it was temporary, just until she got the promotion. On the morning of the 4th day, as he sat alone in the silent kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee, he had an unexpected visitor. It was Mr. Henderson from 3 houses down, a retired widower who spent his days meticulously tending his garden, his front window a quiet vantage point onto the rhythm of the neighborhood. He stood on the porch, twisting a worn baseball cap in his hands, his face etched with discomfort. "Daniel," he started, his voice low, "I hope I'm not overstepping. I saw you and Chloe alone the past few days, and, well, word gets around. I heard about the separation." Daniel just nodded, his coffee growing cold in his hand. "Mr. Henderson took a deep breath. He looked like a man about to confess a sin. "Look, I wasn't going to say anything. It's not my place. But now I feel you have a right to know." Daniel waited, his stomach tightening into a cold knot. "For the last 6 months, maybe longer," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes fixed on his cap. "I've seen Veronica leaving the house at odd hours, usually when I knew you were away on one of your business trips." The knot in Daniel's stomach tightened further. "On at least 3 occasions, I saw her walk to the corner and get into a car. A man was driving. Always the same car, a sleek, black Audi." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "I'm sorry, son," the old man said, finally looking up, his eyes full of pity. "I didn't want to be the one, but I also saw them once, her and the same man, going into the lobby of the Benson downtown. It's the most discreet hotel in the city, just a 15-minute drive from here." "Oh." Daniel thanked him in a voice he didn't recognize. He closed the door and leaned against it, the wood cool against his back. Nausea rose in his throat, but beneath it was a surge of something else. A terrifying, absolute clarity. It all made sense now. The distance, the trips, the expensive, unaccounted-for gifts, the rush to end the marriage the moment her promotion was secure. She wasn't just leaving him. She had already left, a long, long time ago, and there was someone waiting for her on the other side. The grief in his chest began to cool, hardening into something sharp and cold, something that felt dangerously like anger. Daniel wasn't an impulsive man. His entire profession was built on patience, on meticulous analysis, on examining data until it revealed the unvarnished truth. He didn't make moves based on gut feelings. He made them based on evidence. But in that moment, standing in his silent hallway, the neighbor's words echoing in his ears, a fundamental part of him shifted. The patient, supportive husband was gone. In his place was a man who needed the truth, not just a piece of it, all of it. He walked into his home office, his movements steady and deliberate. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. Marcus, a private investigator who had done some discreet background work for his firm on a few corporate merger cases. Marcus was efficient, amoral, and guaranteed results. The call was brief. Daniel provided a name, a description of a black Audi, and the location of the Benson Hotel. He didn't offer context. He didn't need to. He just asked for information. While he waited for Marcus to begin, Daniel started his own investigation. Veronica was careful, but she was also arrogant, overconfident in her own intelligence and his lack of suspicion. When she'd moved into the downtown apartment she'd apparently already secured, she had taken her new, company-issued laptop. She'd left her old personal one behind. He found it in the back of the study closet. He carried it to the desk, plugged it in, and pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life, and his heart hammered against his ribs. Veronica had been thorough. She'd deleted most of the local files. The desktop was clean, the documents folder empty, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten to disconnect her personal cloud account. The automatic backup was still synced. He spent the next several hours conducting a digital autopsy of his marriage. With each click, he felt more like a coroner than a husband, peeling back layers of lies to expose the rot beneath. He started with her emails. He found them, a chain of correspondence with a man named Julian Croft. Daniel vaguely recognized the name from a long-ago company gala. Julian was a high-flying executive at a rival marketing firm in Seattle. The earliest messages dated back nearly 18 months. Daniel read them, his breath catching in his chest. He watched the entire affair unfold in cold, black and white text. It began professionally. Discussions of market trends, industry analysis. Then, the tone shifted. It became personal, flirtatious, then intimate, then explicit. They had met at a marketing summit in San Francisco. From there, the relationship had accelerated. The messages revealed a hidden life lived in parallel to his own. Hotel rendezvous on weekends she claimed to be at leadership retreats. Lavish dinners on expense accounts. Plans for a future that did not include him. Julian, it turned out, was also married. He wrote about his own stale marriage, assuring Veronica it was just a matter of time before he left his wife. "We'll be together as soon as the circumstances are right," one message read. There were mentions of Julian using his connections to whisper Veronica's name in the right ears, leveraging his influence to support her bid for the vice president position. But the final, devastating blow came from a message Veronica herself had sent to Julian just 3 months prior. Daniel had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Once the VP appointment is confirmed, it's done. I'll end it with Daniel. He's been useful. I couldn't have gotten this far without his stability and support, but it's time to move forward. With someone on my own level. Useful. The word hung in the airless room. He was a stepping stone. A stable platform from which she could launch herself into a new life. He wasn't a partner. He was a resource to be exploited until it was no longer needed. Julian had replied with a single heart emoji and a promise. Once we're both free, the sky's the limit. You'll be on the board of directors within 5 years. A cold, controlled rage, unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced, settled over him. It wasn't just the personal betrayal, though that was a wound so deep he was afraid to touch it. It was the calculated cruelty, the cynical manipulation, the fact that the end of his world had been a scheduled event on their calendar. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He saved every message. He took screenshots. He organized everything into dated, categorized folders on an external hard drive. His mind, trained to build cases from financial data, was now building an irrefutable case against his own wife. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in his chest, but it was now encased in ice. That evening, Marcus called with his preliminary report. In less than 48 hours, he had photos, clear, high-resolution images of Veronica and Julian Croft entering and leaving the Benson Hotel on 4 separate occasions over the past 2 months. He had records of lengthy, late-night phone calls between them. Then Marcus added one final, critical piece of information. Julian Croft has been married for 23 years, he said, his voice flat, to a woman named Eleanor Croft. She's on the board of half the major charities in this city. Very well known, very respected, has a reputation for being absolutely relentless when it comes to scandals. Daniel thanked Marcus and asked him to send everything in an encrypted file. He hung up the phone. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. He finally had it. The whole, ugly truth. His next move wasn't about revenge, not in the hot-blooded, destructive sense. It was about consequences. It was about ensuring that people who used and manipulated others did not simply get to walk away unscathed. It was about protecting his daughter and what was left of his own dignity, and he would do it intelligently, quietly, not with a shout, but with the simple, devastating presentation of the truth to the right people, at precisely the right time. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across the room, and he began to draft his letters. They were not letters of a scorned husband. They were reports, factual, direct, and stripped of all emotion. The first was an email to Eleanor Croft. He introduced himself simply as the husband of Veronica Evans. He explained the situation concisely, stating the timeline of the affair and its connection to his own separation. He wasn't melodramatic or accusatory. He just laid out the facts, one after another, and attached the corresponding evidence, dated messages, hotel receipts he'd found in the cloud backup, and Marcus's crystal-clear photographs. He ended it with a simple, formal closing. Sincerely, Daniel Evans. The second was a carefully worded letter, sent anonymously via a secure email service, to the head of human resources and the ethics board at Veronica's company. He focused entirely on the professional implications. He highlighted the messages where Julian Croft, an executive at a rival firm, spoke of using his influence to aid Veronica's promotion. He raised questions about potential conflicts of interest and unethical conduct, carefully attaching only the relevant business-related correspondence. The final email went to the editor of a prominent Portland business journal, a publication known for its investigative pieces on corporate scandals involving the city's elite. He sent the same package of information, framed as a tip from a concerned party about potential ethical breaches in the corporate world. He pressed send on the last email as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window. Then, he picked up his phone and called Veronica. "We need to talk," he said when she answered, his voice steady. "About Chloe, there are practical matters to sort out. It would be better to do it in person." She agreed, a hint of relief in her voice. He could hear her thinking he was finally being reasonable, ready to discuss the terms of his surrender. She said she could be there by 8 that evening. He spent the day preparing. He called his mother and asked if she could take Chloe for the evening. Then he went to a print shop. When Veronica arrived, She walked in with the same air of confident control she'd had a week ago. She was the one in the position of power. She was the one dictating the terms. Sophie was at her grandmother's, and the house was unnervingly quiet. Daniel greeted her in the living room. He didn't offer her a drink. Instead, he gestured towards the coffee table. He had arranged it like a board presentation, neatly printed copies of everything. The emails, laid out in chronological order. The investigators' reports. The glossy, 8x10 photographs of her and Julian, entering the hotel, his hand resting on the small of her back, leaving the next morning, their faces smiling, intimate. She stopped dead in the middle of the room, her eyes locked onto the table. Daniel watched as the color drained from her face, her carefully constructed composure evaporating like mist. She tried to speak, a stammering sound, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "I thought I deserved a real explanation," Daniel began. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room with a cold, heavy intensity she had never heard before. "You told me it wasn't about someone else. You told me it was about you, finding fulfillment." He pointed a finger at the evidence. "But this tells a very different story." She took a step towards the table, as if to sweep it all away, but Daniel moved to block her path. "Julian Croft," he said, the name dropping into the silence like a stone. "An 18-month affair. Hotel meetings while I was at home with our daughter, paying our mortgage. And the best part, you timed the divorce to coincide perfectly with your promotion." He gave a small, humorless smile, a classic use of available resources until they are no longer required. "Daniel, I can explain," she started, but her voice trembled. The eloquent executive was gone, replaced by someone cornered and panicking. "No need," he interrupted, his voice like ice. "It's all very clear. You used our marriage as a stable base while you built your career and your secret life. And Julian used his influence to help you, which I'm sure you know raises some very serious ethical questions for your company." She tried to deny it, to diminish it. She claimed the messages were taken out of context, that Julian was just a supportive friend, that Daniel was twisting everything. But as she spoke, her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that wasn't there. She knew he had too much. "Do you know who Eleanor Croft is?" Daniel asked abruptly, the change in topic throwing her off balance. Veronica blinked, confused. "What?" "She's Julian's wife," Daniel said, his gaze unwavering. "Highly respected in this city. And now, she knows everything. So does your company's ethics board. And so does the Portland Business Journal, which, I hear, loves stories just like this one." All the blood left Veronica's face. She staggered back, catching herself on the arm of the sofa. "You didn't," she whispered, her voice a raw, horrified rasp. "Daniel, you couldn't have. This will destroy me. My career, my reputation." "You destroyed our family," Daniel replied, and for the first time, a tremor of real emotion, of the deep, profound pain he'd been suppressing, broke through his calm facade. "You used 15 years of my life as a means to an end. You betrayed me, and you betrayed Chloe, who worships you and can't understand why her mother suddenly has no time for her." He took a step closer. "You made choices, Veronica, and choices have consequences." She collapsed onto the sofa. The fight was gone. Now came the negotiation. She offered him a better financial settlement. She promised him full custody of Chloe. She begged him to retract the emails, to undo what he had done. But it was too late. He had already made his decision. "The divorce will now proceed on my terms," he said, his voice final. "I will be seeking full custody of Chloe, citing emotional abandonment and the instability your impending scandal will create. And I have no interest in protecting your reputation. You showed no interest in protecting our family." Veronica left that night a completely shattered woman. The confident, powerful executive who had coolly dismantled their marriage just days earlier was gone. In her place was a person facing the ruin she had built with her own hands. Daniel remained alone in the living room, staring at the evidence spread across the table. He felt no pleasure, no thrill of victory, only a deep, aching sadness and the grim resolve of a man who had done what was necessary. The story broke on a Tuesday. It was the front-page feature of the Portland Business Journal's online edition. The headline was devastatingly precise. "Newly appointed VP at Sterling Marketing embroiled in ethical scandal, alleged affair with rival exec." Daniel read it in his office, the door closed. He scanned the detailed article, which quoted anonymous sources and alluded to a trove of documented evidence. It raised sharp questions about improper influence and corporate ethics. It didn't name him, but his existence was a ghostly presence between the lines. He closed the browser, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The storm he had unleashed was now raging, but he was in its quiet, hollow eye. The fallout was swift and brutal. He experienced it through tremors from a distance. He heard from a friend at another firm that an internal investigation had been launched at Veronica's company. Her promotion was put on indefinite hold. Julian Croft was immediately suspended from his position, pending his own firm's inquiry. The social scandal was even more public. Eleanor Croft filed for divorce. Her petition, which became public record, was mercilessly detailed, citing infidelity and painting a portrait of profound betrayal. The city's charity circles buzzed with the news. Major clients began to distance themselves from Julian's firm. Veronica tried to fight back. She issued a public statement claiming her relationship with Julian had only begun after her separation from Daniel. But the dated evidence that the journal clearly possessed made her denial look like a desperate lie. Her carefully crafted reputation, the one he had helped her build for 15 years, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Throughout it all, Daniel focused on one thing: Chloe. He became her shield. He made sure she was away at her grandparents' house the week the story broke. He filtered her access to the news. When she came home and asked questions, hearing whispers from friends at school, he answered them. He didn't lie, but he didn't poison her against her mother either. He spoke about choices and consequences, about adults making terrible mistakes. He was there, for every dinner, for every homework question, for every volleyball practice. He became the one constant in her shifting world, a steady anchor in the storm. The divorce was quick. Veronica, weakened by the public scandal and with no social or professional capital left to fight, agreed to all of his terms. Daniel kept the house. He was granted primary custody of Chloe, with Veronica having limited, supervised visitation. The asset division heavily favored him, a silent acknowledgement of his financial contributions while she had pursued her career and her affair. Her relationship with Julian, the one for which she had sacrificed everything, did not survive the blast. In a desperate attempt to save his own career, Julian publicly blamed her, calling their affair a profound misjudgment and a misunderstood friendship in interviews, effectively throwing her under the bus. Eleanor Croft's legal team, meanwhile, ensured his professional and financial ruin was as complete as possible. One evening, a month after the divorce was finalized, Daniel stood in the kitchen, the same room where his world had ended. It was quiet now. Chloe was upstairs, doing her homework. The scent of lilies was long gone, replaced by the simple smell of the spaghetti sauce he was simmering on the stove. The storm had passed. It had left devastation in its wake, but he and Chloe were still standing. The glass house had been shattered, but he was determined to build something new from the wreckage, something solid, something made of stone. 4 years. 4 years had passed since that night. Daniel stood in the backyard, the gentle afternoon sun warming his shoulders. The scent of damp earth was rich in the air. He was helping Chloe, now a bright and balanced 16-year-old, plant yellow roses along the fence. Her favorite. His life had been rebuilt, slowly and deliberately. His investment firm had grown. He'd hired more staff, expanded into new markets. He was known in the community not just as a sharp financial analyst, but as a man of integrity, a good father. Inside, through the kitchen window, he could see Hannah. She was a librarian he'd met through Chloe, who frequented her section at the local library. Hannah was kind, genuine, with a quiet strength and a love for simple things. Their relationship had blossomed naturally, without drama or ambition. Chloe adored her, seeing in her a warmth and stability she craved. The phone in his pocket rang, an unknown number. He wiped the dirt from his hands and answered. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice, hesitant and broken in a way he still found jarring. "Daniel. It's Veronica." He felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, quiet distance. "She's right here," he said, his tone neutral. She asked if Chloe was home, saying she'd tried her daughter's cell with no answer. He held the phone out to Chloe. Chloe looked at the screen, and a familiar, weary sigh escaped her lips. She took the phone reluctantly and walked towards the house to get some privacy. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to the roses. He could hear the muffled fragments of the conversation through the open window. Chloe's voice, patient but distant, offering monosyllabic replies. A few minutes later, she returned, handing the phone back to him. She just shook her head slightly and knelt back down to the flower bed, as if the call had been nothing more than a minor, necessary chore. Daniel looked at his house. At his daughter beside him, her hands deep in the soil. He saw Hannah wave from the kitchen window, her smile easy and bright. He thought of the journey, the sleepless nights, the raw pain he once thought would never fade, the cold anger he'd had to learn to master before it consumed him. He thought of Veronica, alone in a modest apartment across town. She had kept her job, technically. No direct corruption had been proven. But she was a pariah, an isolated figure in a company that prized image above all else. There would be no more promotions. No more invitations to the galas she had once craved. Julian Croft had moved to another state, cutting off all contact. Her life was a hollow shell of the grand future she had planned. There was no satisfaction in that thought. Only a quiet acceptance that justice, in its own slow, painful way, had prevailed. Life wasn't perfect. There were still scars. He sometimes saw a flicker of sadness in Chloe's eyes, a longing for the mother she could have had, but he had built something real from the wreckage. A daughter who knew she was loved unconditionally, a relationship built on honesty, a life grounded not in ambition, but in presence. The yellow roses would bloom the following spring, filling the garden with color. And he would be here to see it, beside the people who truly mattered. Veronica had chosen prestige over family, and now she had a tarnished prestige with no family to give it meaning. Daniel had chosen truth and dignity. And now, with dirt on his hands and his heart finally at peace, he reaped the rewards. He understood that the best revenge was never about destroying the person who hurt you. It was about building a life so full, so meaningful, that their memory became nothing more than a distant lesson, a faded scar on the path to something incomparably better. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.